Hello and welcome to The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, chapters 25 through 27. The news is all over town in 2 minutes, and you could see the people tearing down on the run from every which way, some of them putting on their coats as they come. Pretty soon we was in the middle of a crowd, and the noise of the tramping was like a soldier march. The windows and dooryards was full, and every minute somebody would say over a fence, "Is it them?" And somebody trotting along with the gang would answer back and say, "You bet it is." When we got to the house, the street in front of it was packed, and the three girls was standing in the door. Mary Jane was redheaded, but that don't make no difference. She was most awful beautiful. That is some redheaded slander. She was redheaded, but that didn't make a difference. She was still beautiful. Messed up. And her face and her eyes was all lit up like glory. She was so glad her uncles was come. The king, he spread his arms, and Mary Jane, she jumped for them, and the hare lip jumped for the duke, and there they had it. Everybody, most leastways women, cried for joy to see them meet at last and have such good times. Then the king, he hunched the duke private, like the little huddle. I see him do it. And then he looked around and see the coffin over in the corner on two chairs. So then him and the duke, with a hand across each other's shoulder and the other hand to their eyes, walked slow and solemn over there, everybody dropping back to give them room, and all the talk and noise stopping, people saying shh, and all the men taking their hats off and drooping their heads so you could have heard a pin fall. And when they got there, they bent over and looked in the coffin and took one side, and then they bust out a crying, so you could have heard them to Orleans most. And then they put their arms around each other's necks and hung their chins over each other's shoulders. And then for 3 minutes, or maybe 4, I never see two men leak the way they done. They cried. And mind you, everybody was doing the same, and the place was that damp, I never see anything like it. Then one of them got on one side of the coffin, and the other on the other side, and they kneeled down and rested their foreheads on the coffin and let on to pray all to themselves. Well, when it come to that, it worked the crowd like you never seen anything like it. And so everybody broke down and went to sobbing right out loud, the poor girls too. And every woman nearly went up to the girls without saying a word and kissed them solemn on the forehead, and then put their hand on their head and looked up towards the sky with the tears running down, and then busted out and went off sobbing and swabbing and gave the next woman a show. I never see anything so disgusting. So there's number one about how the king and the duke are playing on everyone's emotions, how they're acting. Well, by and by, the king, he gets up and comes forward a little and works himself up and slobbers out a speech all full of tears and flapdoodle about it's being a sore trial for him and his poor brother to lose the deceased and to miss seeing the deceased alive after a long journey of 4,000 miles. But it's a trial that's sweetened and sanctified to us by this dear sympathy and these holy tears. And so he thanks them out of his heart and out of his brother's heart, because out of their mouths they can't, words being too weak and cold and all that kind of rotten slush, till he was just sickening. And then he blubbers out a pious goody-goody amen and turns himself loose and goes to crying fit to bust. And the minute the words was out of his mouth, somebody over in the crowd struck up the doxologer. That's a mispronunciation of doxology, which is a song that ends Christian church sessions. And everybody joined in with all their might, and it just warmed you up and made you feel as good as church letting out. Music is a good thing, and after all that soul butter and hogwash, I never see it freshen up things so and sound so honest and bully. Then the king begins to work his jaw again and says how him and his nieces would be glad if a few of the main principal friends of the family would take supper here with them this evening and help set up with the ashes of the deceased, and says if his poor brother laying yonder could speak, he knows who he would name, for there was names that was very dear to him and mentioned often in his letters, and so he will name the same, to wit, as follows: Reverend Mr. Hobson and Deacon Lot Hobby and Mr. Ben Rucker and Abner Shackelford and Levi Bell and Dr. Robinson and their wives and the widow Bartley. Reverend Hobson and Dr. Robinson was down at the end of the town a-hunting together. That is, the doctor was shipping a sick man to the other world. He's dying. And the preacher was pinting him upright. Lawyer Bell was away up in Louisville on some business, but the rest was on hand. And so they all come up and shook hands with the king and thanked him and talked to him. And then they shook hands with the duke and didn't say nothing, but just kept smiling and bobbing their heads like a passel of sap heads, while he made all sorts of signs with his hands and said, goo, 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 all the time like a baby that can't talk. So the king, he blatted along, managed to inquire about pretty much everybody and dog in town by his name, and mentioned all sorts of little things that happened one time or another in the town, or to George's family, or to Peter, and he always let on that Peter wrote him the things, but that was a lie. He got every blessed one of them out of that young flathead that we canoed up to the steamboat. Then Mary Jane, she fetched the letter her uncle left behind, and the king, he read it out loud and cried over it. It gave the dwelling house and $3,000 gold to the girls. and it gave the tan yard, which is doing a good business, along with some other houses and land, worth about $7,000 and $3,000 in gold to Harvey and William, and told where the $6,000 cash was hid down cellar. So these two frauds said they'd go and fetch it up and have everything square and above board, and told me to come with a candle. We shut the cellar door behind us, and when they found the bag, they spilled it out on the floor, and it was a lovely sight. All of them yaller boys, which are gold coins, yellow boys. My, the way the king's eyes did shine. He slaps the Duke on the shoulder and says, "Oh, this ain't bully or nothing. Oh, no, I reckon not. Why, Bilgy, it beats the nonsuch, don't it?" The Duke allowed it did. They pawed the yaller boys and sifted them through their fingers and let them jingle down on the floor. And the king says, "It ain't no use talking being brothers to a rich dead man and representatives of furrin heirs that's got left. This is the line for you and me, Bilge. This here comes of us trusting to Providence, trusting to God, like God wants this. It's the best way in the long run. I've tried them all, and there ain't no better way." Most everybody would have been satisfied with the pile and took it on trust, but no, they must count it. So they counts it, and it comes out $415 short. Says the king, "Burn him, I wonder what he done with that $415. They worried over that a while and ransacked all around for it. Then the Duke says, "Well, he was a pretty sick man, and likely he made a mistake. I reckon that's the way of it. The best way is to let it go and keep still about it. We can spare it." "Oh, shucks, yes, we can spare it. I don't care nothing about that. It's the count I'm thinking about. We want to be awful square and open and above board here, you know. We want to lug this here money upstairs and count it before everybody. Then there ain't nothing suspicious. But when the dead man says there's $6,000, you know, we don't want to—" "Hold on," says the Duke. "Let's make up the deficit." And he begins to haul out yaller boys out of his own pocket. "It's a most amazing good idea, Duke. You have got a rattling clever head on you," says the king. "Blessed if the nonsuch ain't helping us out again." And he begun to haul out yaller jackets and stack them up. It most busted them, but they made up the 6,000 clean and clear. "Say," says the Duke, "I got another idea. Let's go upstairs and count this money and then take it and give it to the girls." "Good land, Duke, let me hug you. It's the most dazzling idea that man ever struck. You have certainly got the most astonishing head I ever see. Oh, this is the boss dodge. There ain't no mistake about it. Let them fetch along their suspicions now if they want to. This'll lay them out." There's the answer to number 2 about what they decided to do with the money and why they're doing it. When we got upstairs, everybody gathered around the table, and the king, he counted it and stacked it up, $300 in a pile, 20 elegant little piles. Everybody looked hungry at it and licked their chops. Then they raked it into the bag again, and I see the king begun to swell himself up for another speech. He says, "Friends all, my poor brother that lays yonder has done generous by them that's left behind in the vale of sorrows. He has done generous by these here poor little lambs that he loved and sheltered, and that's left fatherless and motherless. Yes, and we not knowed him, knows that he would have done more generous by him if he hadn't been afeard of wounding his dear William and me. Now, wouldn't he? There ain't no question about it in my mind. Well, then, what kind of brothers would it be that'd stand in his way at such a time? And what kind of uncles would it be that'd rob, yes, rob, such poor sweet lambs as these he loved so at such a time? If I know William, and I think I do, well, I'll just ask him." He turns around and begins to make a lot of signs to the Duke with his hands. And the Duke, he looks at him stupid and leather-headed a while. Then all of a sudden he seems to catch his meaning and jumps for the king, goo-gooing with all his might for joy, and hugs him about 15 times before he lets up. Then the king says, "I knowed it. I reckon that'll convince anybody the way he feels about it. Here, Mary Jane, Susan, Joanna, take the money. Take it all. It's the gift of him that lays yonder, cold but joyful." Mary Jane, she went for him. Susan and the hair lip, again, that's a birth defect, like your lip is all bunched up like that. Not a nice thing to call Joanna the hair lip, but that's what he calls her. Susan and the hair lip went for the Duke, and then such another hugging and kissing I never see again. And everybody crowded up with the tears in their eyes and most shook the hands off of them frauds, saying all the time, "You dear good souls, how lovely, how could you?" Well, then, pretty soon, all hands got talking about the deceased again and how good he was and what a loss he was and all that. And before long, a big iron-jawed man worked himself in there from outside and stood listening and looking, not saying anything, and nobody saying anything to him either, because the king was talking and they was all busy listening. The king was saying, in the middle of something he'd started in on, "They being particular friends of the deceased,
That's why they're invited here this evening. But tomorrow, we want all to come, everybody, for he respected everybody, he liked everybody, and so it's fitting that his funeral orgies should be made public. And so he went mooning on and on, liking to hear himself talk, and every little while he fetched in his funeral orgies again, till the Duke, he couldn't stand it no more, so he writes on a little scrap of paper, "Obsequies, you old fool," and folds it up and goes to goo-gooing and reaching over people's heads to him. The king, he reads it, puts it in his pocket, and says, "Oh, poor William, afflicted as he is, his heart's all is right. Asked me to invite everybody to come to the funeral. Wants me to make 'em all welcome. But he needn't have worried. It was just what I was at." Then he weaves along again, perfectly calm, and goes to dropping in his funeral orgies again every now and then, just like he done before. And when he done it the third time, he says, "I say orgies, not because it's the common term, because it ain't. Obsequies being the common term, but because orgies is the right term. Obsequies ain't used in England no more. Now, it's gone out. We say orgies now in England. Orgies is better because it means the thing you're after, more exact. It's a word that's made out in the Greek orgo, outside, open, abroad, and the Hebrew gism, to plant, cover up, hence inter. So you see, funeral orgies is an open public funeral." And there's the very convoluted answer to number 3. "He was the worst I ever struck." Well, the iron-jawed man, he laughed right in his face. Everybody was shocked. Everybody says, "Why, doctor?" And Abner Shackelford says, "Why, Robinson, ain't you heard the news? This is Harvey Wilkes." The king, he smiled eager and shoved out his flapper and says, "Is it my poor brother's dear good friend and physician? Keep your hands off of me," says the doctor. "You talk like an Englishman, don't you? It's the worst imitation I ever heard. You, Peter Wilkes' brother, you're a fraud, that's what you are." Well, how they all took on. They crowded around the doctor and tried to quiet him down and tried to explain to him and tell him how Harvey had showed in 40 ways that he was Harvey and knowed everybody by name and the names of the very dogs, and begged him not to hurt Harvey's feelings and the poor girl's feelings and all that. But it weren't no use. He stormed right along and said any man that pretended to be an Englishman and couldn't imitate the lingo no better than what he did was a fraud and a liar. The poor girls was hanging to the king and crying, and all of a sudden the doctor ups and turns on them. He says, "I was your father's friend, and I'm your friend, and I'll warn you as a friend, and an honest one that wants to protect you and keep you out of harm and trouble, to turn your backs on that scoundrel and have nothing to do with him, the ignorant tramp with his idiotic Greek and Hebrew, as he calls it. He is the thinnest kind of imposter. He has come here with a lot of empty names and facts which he has picked up somewheres, and you take them for proofs, and are helped to fool yourselves by these foolish friends here who ought to know better. Mary Jane Wilkes, you know me for your friend and for your unselfish friend, too. Now listen to me. Turn this pitiful rascal out. I beg you to do it. Will you?" Mary Jane straightened herself up, and my, but she was handsome. She says, "Here is my answer." She hove up the bag of money and put it in the king's hands and says, "Take this $6,000 and invest for me and my sisters any way you want to, and don't give us no receipt for it." And then she put her arm around the king on one side, and Susan and the Harelip done the same on the other. Everybody clapped their hands and stomped on the floor like a perfect storm, whilst the king held up his head and smiled proud. The doctor says, "All right, I'll wash my hands of the matter, but I warn you all that a time's coming when you're going to feel sick whenever you think of this day." And away he went. "All right, doctor," says the king, kind of mocking him. "We'll try and get him to send for you," which made them all laugh. And they said it was a prime good hit. So they'll feel sick not to send for the doctor. That's answer number 4 and the end of chapter 25. Chapter 26. Well, when they was all gone, the king, he asked Mary Jane how they was off for spare rooms. And she said she had one spare room, which would do for Uncle William. And she'd give her own room to Uncle Harvey, which was a little bigger. And she would turn into the room with her sisters and sleep on a cot. And up garret was a little cubby with a pallet in it. The king said the cubby would do for his valley, meaning me. So Mary Jane took us up, and she showed them their rooms, which was plain but nice. She said she'd have her frocks and a lot of other traps took out of her room if they was in Uncle Harvey's way, but he said they weren't. The frocks was hung along the wall, and before them was a curtain made out of calico and hung down to the floor. There was an old hair trunk in one corner and a guitar box in another with all sorts of little knickknacks and gimcracks around, like girls brisking up with room with. The king said it was all the more homely and more pleasanter for these fixins,
and so didn't disturb them. The Duke's room was pretty small, but plenty good enough, and so was my cubby. That night, they had a big supper, and all them men and women was there, and I stood behind the king and the Duke's chairs and waited on them, and the N-words waited on the rest. Mary Jane, she sat at the head of the table with Susan alongside of her and said how bad the biscuits was and how mean the preserves was and how ornery and tough the fried chickens was and all that kind of rot, the way women always do to force out compliments. And the people all knowed everything was tip-top and said, how do you get the biscuits to brown so nice? And where, for the land's sake, did you get these amazing pickles? And all that kind of humbug talky talk, just the way people always does at a supper, you know. And when it was all done, me and the hare lip had supper in the kitchen off of the leavings whilst the others was helping the N-words clean up the things. The hare lip, she got up to pumping me about England. And blessed if I didn't think the ice was getting mighty thin sometimes. She says, did you ever see the king? Who, William IV? Well, bet I have. He goes to our church. I knowed he was dead years ago, but I never let on. So when I says he goes to our church, she says, what, regular? Yes, regular. His pew's right over opposite ourn on the other side of the pulpit. I thought he lived in London. Well, he does. Where would he live? But I thought you lived in Sheffield. I see I was up a stump. I had to let on to get choked with a chicken bone so as to get time to think how to get down again. Then I says, I mean, he goes to our church regular when he's in Sheffield. That's only in the summertime when he comes there to take sea baths. Why, how you talk? Sheffield ain't on the sea. Well, who said it was? Why, you did. I didn't, Nother. You did. I didn't. You did. I never said anything of the kind. Well, what did you say then? I said he come to take the sea baths. That's what I said. Well then, how's he going to take the sea baths if it ain't on the sea? Looky here, I says. Did you ever see any Congress water? Yes. Well, did you have to go to Congress to get it? Why, no. Well, neither does William IV have to go to the sea to get a sea bath. Well, how does he get it then? He gets it the way people down here gets Congress water in barrels. There in the palace at Sheffield, they've got furnaces, and he wants his water hot. They can't boil that amount of water way off there at the sea. They ain't got no conveniences for it. Oh, I see now. You might have said that in the first place and saved time. When she said that, I see I was out of the woods again, so I was comfortable and glad. Next, she says, do you go to church too? Yes, regular. Where do you sit? Why, in our pew. Whose pew? Why, our'n, your Uncle Harvey's. His'n. What does he want with a pew? Wants it to sit in. What do you reckon he wanted with it? Why, I thought he'd be in the pulpit. Rot him, I forgot he was a preacher. I see I was up a stump again, so I played another chicken bone and got another think. Then I says, blame it, do you suppose there ain't but one preacher to a church? Why, what do they want with more? What? To preach before a king? I never see such a girl as you. They don't have no less than 17. 17, my land! Why, I wouldn't set out such a string as that, not if I never got to glory. It must take 'em a week. Shucks, they don't all of them preach the same day, only one of them. Well then, what does the rest of them do? Oh, nothing much, loll around, pass the plate, or one thing or another. But mainly they don't do nothing. Well, what are they for? Well, why, they're for style. Don't you know nothing? Well, I don't want to know no such foolishness as that. How is servants treated in England? Do they treat them better than we treat our N-words? No, a servant ain't nobody there. They treat them worse than dogs. Don't they give them holidays the way we do, Christmas and New Year's and the 4th of July? Oh, just listen. A body can tell you ain't ever been to England by that. Why, Joanna, they never see a holiday from year's end to year's end. Never go to the circus, nor theater, nor N-word shows, nor nowheres. Nor church? Nor church. But you always went to church. Well, I was gone up again. I forgot I was the old man's servant, but the next minute I whirled in on kind of an explanation how a valley was different from a common servant and had to go to church whether he wanted to or not and sit with the family on account of its being the law. But I didn't do it pretty good. And when I got done, I see she weren't satisfied. She says, honest Injun now, ain't you been telling me a lot of lies? Honest Injun, I says. None of it at all. None of it at all. Not a lie in it, says I. Lay your hand on this book and say it. I see it weren't nothing but a dictionary, so I laid my hand on it and said it. So then she looked a little better satisfied and says, well then, I'll believe some of it, but I hope to gracious if I'll believe the rest. There's number 5. There's several lies that Huck tells that he gets caught in by Joanna, whom he refers to as the harelip. What is it you won't believe, Joe? Says Mary Jane, stepping in with Susan behind her. It ain't right nor kind for you to talk so to him, and him a stranger and so far from his people. How would you like to be treated so? That's always your way, ma'am, always sailing in to help somebody before they're hurt. I ain't done nothing to him. He's told some stretchers, I reckon, and I said I wouldn't swallow it all, and that's every bit and grain I did say. I reckon he can stand a little thing like that, can he? I don't care whether 'twas a little or whether 'twas big. He's here in our house and a stranger, and it wasn't good of you to say it. If you was in his place, it would make you feel ashamed, and so you oughtn't say a thing to another person that will make them feel ashamed. Why, ma'am, he said, it don't make no difference what he said. That ain't the thing. The thing for you is to treat him kind and not be saying things to make him remember he ain't in his own country and amongst his own folks. I says to myself, this is a girl that I'm letting that old reptile rob her of all her money. Then Susan, she waltzed in, and if you'll believe me, she did give Harelip hark from the tomb. Says out of myself, this is another one. I'm letting him rob her of her money. Then Mary Jane, she took another inning and went in sweet and lovely again, which was her way. When she got done, there weren't hardly anything left to old poor Harelip. So she hollered, all right then, says the other girls. You just ask his pardon. Say you're sorry to him. She done it too. And she done it beautiful. She done it so beautiful it was good to hear, and I wished I could tell her 1,000 lies so she could do it again. I says to myself, this is another one that I'm letting him rob her of her money. And when she got through, they all just laid themselves out to make me feel at home and know I was amongst friends. I felt so ornery and low down and mean that I says to myself, my mind's made up. I'll hive that money for them or bust. Steal it for them or bust. So then I lit out. For bed, I said, meaning sometime or another. When I got by myself, I went to thinking the thing over. I says to myself, shall I go to that doctor private and blow on these frauds? No, that won't do. He might tell who told him, then the king and the duke would make it warm for me. Shall I go private and tell Mary Jane? No, I dasn't do it. Her face would give them a hint, sure. They got the money, and they'd slide right out and get away with it. If she was to fetch in help, I'd get mixed up in the business before it was done with, I judged. No, there ain't no good way but one. I got to steal that money somehow, and I got to steal it some way that they won't suspicion that I'd done it. They've got a good thing here, and they ain't going to leave till they've played this family and this town for all they're worth. So I'll find a chance time enough. I'll steal it and hide it, and by and by, when I'm way down the river, I'll write a letter and tell Mary Jane where it's hid. But I better hide it tonight if I can, because the doctor maybe hasn't let up as much as he lets on he has. He might scare them out of it. He might scare them out of here. Yeah. There's number 6 about what Huck's plan is. So, thinks I'll go and search them rooms. Upstairs the hall was dark, but I found the Duke's room and started to paw around it with my hands, but I recollected it wouldn't be much like the king to let anybody else take care of that money but his own self. So then I went to his room and began to paw around there. But I couldn't do nothing without a candle, and I doesn't light one, of course. So I judged I got to do the other thing. I got to lay for them and eavesdrop. About that time, I hears their footsteps coming, and I was going to skip under the bed. I reached for it, but it wasn't where I thought it would be. But I touched the curtain that hid Mary Jane's frocks, so I jumped in behind that and snuggled in amongst the gowns and stood there perfectly still. They come in and shut the door, and the first thing the Duke done was to get down and look under the bed. Then I was glad I hadn't found the bed where I wanted it. And yet, it's kind of natural to hide under the bed when you are up to anything private. They sets down then, and the king says, well, what is it? And cut it middle and short, because it's better for us to be down there and whooping up the morning than up here giving them a chance to talk us over. Well, this is it, Captain. It ain't easy. I ain't comfortable. That doctor lays on my mind. I wanted to know your plans. I've got a notion, and I think it's a sound one. What is it, Duke? That we better glide out of this before 3 a.m. and clip it down the river with what we've got, especially seeing we got it so easy, given back to us, flung at our heads, as you may say, when of course we allowed to have to steal it back. I'm for knocking off and lighting out. That made me feel pretty bad. About an hour or two ago, it would have been a little different, but now it made me feel bad and disappointed. The king rips out and says, what? And not sell out the rest of the property?
March off like a passel of fools and leave $8,000 or $9,000 worth of property just laying around, just suffering to be scooped in? And all the good saleable stuff, too?
The Duke, he grumbled, said the bag of gold was good enough, and he didn't want to go no deeper, didn't want to rob a lot of orphans of everything they had.
Why, how you talk, says the king. We shan't rob them of nothing at all but just this money. The people that buys the property is the stuffers, because as soon as it's found out that we didn't own it, which won't be long after we've slid, the sale won't be valid, and it'll all go back to the estate. These your orphans will get their house back again, and that's enough for them. They're young and spry and can easy earn a living. They ain't no going to suffer. Well, I just think there's thousands and thousands that ain't so well off. Bless you, they ain't got nothing to complain of.
So there's number 7 about what the king plans to do despite the Duke's objections. Well, the king, he talked him blind, and at last he gave in and said, all right, but said he believed it was blamed foolishness to stay with that doctor hanging over them. But the king says, cuss the doctor. What do we care for him? Ain't we got all the fools in town on our side, and ain't that big enough majority in any town? So they got ready to go downstairs again. The Duke says, I don't think we put that money in a good place. That cheered me up. I began to think I wasn't going to get a hint of no kind to help me. The king says, why? Because Mary Jane will be in mourning from this out. And first you know the N-word that does up the rooms will get an order to box these duds up, these clothes up, and put them away. And do you reckon an N-word can run across money and not borrow some of it? There's number 8, the deeply ironic worry of the Duke, that the slave might steal the money if they come across it.
Your head's level again, Duke,
says the king, and he come a fumbling under the curtain 2 or 3 foot from where I was. I stuck tight to the wall and kept mighty still, though quivery, and I wondered what them fellows would say to me if they catch me, and I tried to think what I'd better do if they did catch me. But the king, he got the bag before I could think more than about a half a thought, and he never suspicioned I was around. They took it and shoved the bag through a rip in the straw tick that was under the feather bed and crammed it in a foot or two amongst the straw and said it was all right now because an N-word only makes up the feather bed and don't turn over the straw tick only about twice a year, so it weren't no danger of getting stole now. But I know better. I had it out of there before they was halfway downstairs. I groped along up to my cubby and hid it there till I could get a chance to do better. I judged I better hide it outside of the house somewheres because if they missed it, they would give the house a good ransacking. I know that very well. Then I turned in with my clothes and all on, but I couldn't have gone to sleep if I'd wanted to. I was in such a sweat to get through with the business. By and by, I heard the king and the Duke come up, so I rolled off my pallet and laid with my chin at the top of my ladder and waited to see if anything was going to happen. But nothing did. So I held on till the late sounds had quit and the early ones hadn't begun yet, and then I slipped down the ladder. And that's the end of chapter 26. Here's chapter 27. I crept to their doors and listened. They was snoring, so I tiptoed along, got downstairs all right. There weren't a sound anywheres. I peeped through a crack of the dining room door and see the men that was watching the corpse all sound asleep on their chairs. The door was open into the parlor where the corpse was laying, and there was a candle in both rooms. I passed along, and the parlor door was open, but I see there weren't nobody in there but the remainders of Peter. So I shoved on by, but the front door was locked and the key wasn't there. Just then I heard somebody coming down the stairs back behind me. I run in the parlor and took a swift look around, and the only place I see to hide the bag was in the coffin. The lid was shoved along about a foot, showing the dead man's face down there with a wet cloth over it and his shroud on. I tucked the money bag in under the lid, just down beyond where his hands was crossed, which made me creep. They was so cold. And then I run back across the room and in behind the door. There's your answer to number 9. The person coming in was Mary Jane. She went to the coffin very soft and kneeled down and looked in. Then she put up her handkerchief and I see she begun to cry, though I couldn't hear her and her back was to me. I slid out, and as I passed the dining room, I thought I'd make sure them watchers hadn't seen me. So I looked through the crack and everything was all right. They hadn't stirred. I slipped up to bed feeling rather blue on account of the thing playing out the way after I took so much trouble and run so much risk about it. Says I, if it could stay where it is, all right. Because when we get down the river 100 miles or two, I could ride back to Mary Jane and she could dig him up again and get it. But that ain't the thing that's going to happen. The thing that's going to happen is the money will be found when they come to screw on the lid. Then the king will get it again. It'll be a long day before he gives anybody another chance to smouch it from him. Of course, I wanted to slide down and get it out of there, but I doesn't try it. Every minute it was getting earlier now, and pretty soon some of them watchers would begin to stir, and I might get catched. Catched with $6,000 in my hands that nobody hadn't hired me to take care of. I I don't wish to be mixed up in such business as that, I says to myself. When I got downstairs in the morning, the parlor was shut up and the watchers was gone. There weren't nobody around but the family and the widow Bartley and our tribe. I watched their faces to see if anything had been happening, but I couldn't tell. Towards the middle of the day, the undertaker come with his man, and they set the coffin in the middle of the room on a couple of chairs, and then set all our chairs in rows and borrowed more from the neighbors till the hall and the parlor and the dining room was full. I see the coffin lid was the way it was before, but I dasn't go to look under it with folks around. Then the people begun to flock in, and the Beats and the girls, the Beats, King and the Duke, and the girls took seats in the front row at the head of the coffin. For a half an hour, the people filed around slow in single rank and looked down at the dead man's face a minute, and some dropped in a tear, and it was all very still and solemn, only the girls and the Beats holding handkerchiefs to their eyes and keeping their heads bent and sobbing a little. There weren't no other sound but the scraping of the feet on the floor and blowing noses, because people always blows them more at a funeral than they do at other places, except church. When the place was packed full, the undertaker, he slid around in his black gloves, this softy, soothing ways, putting on the last touches and getting people and things all shipshape and comfortable and making no more sound than a cat. He never spoke. He moved people around. He squeezed in late ones. He opened up passageways and done it all with nods and signs with his hands. Then he took his place over against the wall. He was the softest, glidingest, stealthiest man I ever see, and there weren't no more smile to him than there is to a ham. They had borrowed a melodeon, which is a small reed organ, a sick one, and when everything was ready, a young woman sat down and worked it, and it was pretty squeaky and colicky, and everybody joined in and sung, and Peter was the only one that had a good thing, according to my notion. Peter being the dead guy, he didn't have to listen to this bad organ playing, all these people singing. Then the Reverend Hobson opened up, slow and solemn, began to talk, and straight off, the most outrageous row busted out in the cellar a body ever heard. It was only one dog, but he made a most powerful racket, and he kept it up right along. The parson, he had to stand there over the coffin and wait. You couldn't hear yourself think. It was right down awkward, and nobody didn't seem to know what to do. But pretty soon, they see that long-legged undertaker make a sign to the preacher as much as say, "Don't you worry, just depend on me." Then he stooped down and began to glide along the wall, just his shoulders showing over the people's heads. So he glided along, and the powwow and racket getting more and more outrageous all the time. And at last, when he had gone around two sides of the room, he disappears down cellar. Then, in about 2 seconds, we heard a whack, and the dog, he finished up with the most amazing howl or two, and then everything was dead still, and the parson begun his solemn talk where he left off. In a minute or two, here comes the undertaker's back and shoulders gliding along the wall again, and so he glided and glided around three sides of the room, and then rose up and shaded his mouth with his hands, and stretched his neck out toward the preacher over the people's heads, and says in kind of coarse whisper, "He had a rat." Then he drooped down and glided along the wall again to his place. You could see it was a great satisfaction to the people, because naturally they wanted to know. There's answer number 10. A little thing like that don't cost nothing, and it's just the little things that makes a man to be looked up to and liked. There weren't no more popular man in town than what that undertaker was. And there's number 11, just a little throwaway joke about the undertaker being the most popular man in town. Well, the funeral sermon was very good, but pissing long and tiresome. And then the king, he shoved in and got some more of his usual rubbish, and at last the job was through, and the undertaker began to sneak up on the coffin with his screwdriver. I was in a sweat then and watched him pretty keen, but he never meddled at all, just slid the lid along, soft as mush, and screwed it down tight and fast. So there I was. I didn't know whether the money was in there or not. So says I, suppose somebody has hogged that bag on the sly. Now how do I know whether to write to Mary Jane or not? Suppose she dug him up and didn't find nothing. What would she think of me? Blame it, I says. I might get hunted up and jailed. I'd better lay low and keep dark and not ride at all. The thing's awful mixed now, trying to better it. I've worsened it 100 times, and I wish to goodness I'd just let it alone. Dad fetched the whole business. They buried him, and we come back home, and I went to watching faces again. I couldn't help it, and I couldn't rest easy. But nothing come of it. The faces didn't tell me nothing. The king, he visited around in the evening and sweetened everybody up and made himself ever so friendly and give out the idea that his congregation over in England would be in a sweat about him, so he must hurry and settle up the estate right away and leave for home. He was very sorry he was so pushed, and so was everybody. They wished he could stay longer, but they said they could see it couldn't be done. And he said, of course, him and William would take the girls home with them, and that pleased everybody too, because then the girls would be well fixed and amongst their own relations, and it pleased the girls too. Tickled them so they clean forgot they ever had a trouble in the world, and told him to sell out as quick as he wanted to. They would be ready. Them poor things was that glad and happy it made my heart ache to see them getting fooled and lied to so, but I didn't see no safe way for me to chip in and change the general tune. Well, blamed if the king didn't build the house and the N-words and all the property for auction straight off. Sale 2 days after the funeral. But anybody could buy private beforehand if they wanted to. So the next day after the funeral, along about noontime, the girls' joy got the first jolt. A couple of N-word traders come along. And the king sold them the N-words reasonable for 3-day drafts, as they called it, and away they went. The two sons up the river to Memphis and their mother down the river to Orleans. I thought them poor girls and them N-words would break their hearts for grief. They cried around each other and took on so it most made me down sick to see it. The girls said they had never dreamed of seeing the family separated or sold away from the town. I can't ever get out of my memory the sight of them poor miserable girls and N-words hanging around each other's necks and crying, and I reckon I couldn't have stood it all, but would have had to bust out and tell on our gang if I hadn't knowed the sale weren't no account and the N-words would be back home in a week or two. The thing made a big stir in the town too, and that's the answer is number 12 right there. The thing that made a big stir in town too, and a good many come out flat-footed and said it was scandalous to separate the mother and the children that way. It injured the frauds some. But the old fool, he bowled right along, spite of all the Duke could say or do, and I tell you, the Duke was powerful uneasy. Next day was auction day. About broad day in the morning, the king and the Duke come up in the garret and woke me up, and I see by their look that there was trouble. The king says, "Was you in my room night before last?" "No, your majesty," which is the way I always call them when nobody but our gang weren't around. "Was you in there yesterday or last night?" "No, your majesty." "Honor bright now, no lies." "Honor bright, your majesty, I'm telling you the truth. I hain't been near your room since Miss Mary Jane took you and the Duke and showed it to you." The Duke says, "Have you seen anybody else go in there?" "No, your grace, not as I remember, I believe." "Stop and think." I studied a while, and I see my chance. And then I says, "Well, I see the N-words go in there several times." Both of them give a little jump and look like they hadn't ever expected it, and then like they had. Then the Duke says, "What, all of them?" "No, leastways not all at once. That is, I don't think I ever see them all come out, but at once, but just one time." "Hello, when was that?" "It was the day we had the funeral. In the morning, it weren't early because I overslept. I was just starting down the ladder, and I see them." "Well, go on, go on. What did they do? How'd they act?" "Well, they didn't do nothing, and they didn't act anyway, much, as far as I could see. They tiptoed away, so I seen easy enough that they shoved in there to do up your majesty's room or something, supposing you was up, and found you weren't up, and so they was hoping to slide out of the way of trouble without waking you up if they hadn't already waked you up."
"Great guns, this is a go,"
says the king, and both of them looked pretty sick and tolerable silly. They stood there thinking and scratching their heads a minute, and then the Duke, he bust into a kind of little raspy chuckle and says, "It does beat all how neat the N-words played their hand. They let on be sorry that they was getting out of this region, and I believe they was sorry, and so did you, and so did everybody. Don't ever tell me anymore that an N-word ain't got any histrionic talent. Why, the way they played that thing, it would fool anybody. In my opinion, there's a fortune in them. If I had a capital and a theater, I wouldn't want a better layout than that. And here we've gone and sold them for a song. Yes, and ain't privileged to sing the song yet. Say, where is that song, the draft? Meaning the money."
"In the bank, waiting for it to be collected. Where would it be?"
There's just number 13 about what the king and the Duke assume about the slaves, which is deeply ironic because they're the ones actually doing this.
"Well, that's all right then, thank goodness."
Says I, kind of timid like, "Is something gone wrong?" The king whirls on me and rips out,
"None of your business. You keep your head shut and mind your own affairs if you got any. Long as you're in this town, don't you forget that, you hear?"
Then he says to the Duke,
"We got to just swallow it and say nothing. Mum's the word for us."
And then they was starting down the ladder. The Duke, he chuckles again and says,
"Oh, quick sales and small profits. It's a good business, yes?"
The king snarls around at him and says,
I was trying to do for the best and selling them out so quick. If the profits has turned out to be none, lacking considerable and none to carry, is it my fault any more than it's yourn?"
"Well, they'd be in this house yet, and we wouldn't if I could got my advice listened to." The king sassed back as much as was safe for him and then swapped around and lit into me again. He give me to down the banks for not coming and telling him I see the N-words come out of his room acting that way. Said any fool would have knowed something was up, and then waltzed in and cussed himself a while and said it all come to him not laying late and taking his natural rest that morning, and he blamed if he'd ever do it again. So they went off at John. I felt dreadful glad I'd worked it all off onto the N-words and hadn't yet done the N-words no harm by it. And that's the end of chapter 27. Thanks for coming.